to the great variety of readers, signed in the names of Heminges and Condell. The whole bedrock of the Shakespeare First Folio is predicated on the fiction that 7 years after the death of William Shakspere of Stratford, his acting friends John Heminges and Henry Condell edited the First Folio and wrote its dedication to William and Philip Herbert and the address to the great variety of readers, to which their names are signed. This was originally all part of the charade created by Bacon and his Divine Rosicrucian Freemasonry Brotherhood to conceal his true authorship behind the mask of William Shakespeare. Of course, Heminges and Condell did not organise and oversee the enormous enterprise and production of the First Folio, and nor did they write the 2 epistles to which their names are attached. Yet, even though this now self-evident, absurd nonsense has long and repeatedly been exposed for what it is, this false and fraudulent narrative is still perpetrated by mainstream biographers of William Shakespeare of Stratford and Stratfordian authors of books on the Shakespeare First Folio to the present day. All safe in the knowledge that the ordinary schoolman, the casual student, and virtually the rest of the world at large remain ignorant of this central Stratfordian falsehood and lie that Heminges and Condell oversaw the enterprise of the First Folio as a tribute to their fellow actor William Shakespeare. This despite the fact that other overlooked and ignored Shakespeare editors and academics in less well-known or accessible publications have long maintained that Heminges and Condell only lent their names to the vast enterprise, and that the 2 epistles signed in their names were most likely written by Ben Jonson. This is all but ignored by modern so-called Stratfordian authorities, because when the false and fraudulent fiction that Heminges and Condell oversaw the production of the First Folio is exposed for what it really is, it begs the key critical question: just who were responsible for producing it behind a wall of silence and secrecy? The epistle dedicatory to the incomparable pair of brethren, the Grand Master of England, William Herbert, Earl of Pembroke, and Philip Herbert, Earl of Montgomery, and the address to the great variety of readers, both signed in the names of the actors John Heminges and Henry Condell, are usually examined in tandem by Shakespeare scholars. It should have been clear from the outset that things were not as they seemed, and obvious that the learned dedication and the address were replete with inconsistencies, incongruities and false statements, and could not have been written by the 2 actors who put their names to them. The first to raise the spectre of this false attribution was the 18th century Shakespeare editor and scholar George Steevens, who was responsible for the 10-volume edition of the Shakespeare plays which appeared in 1773, a further second 10-volume edition in 1778, and a 15-volume edition published in 1793. Underneath the 2 epistles signed by the actors Heminges and Condell, Steevens stated it was his contention that Ben Jonson was partly responsible for the address to the great variety of readers. After the publication of my first edition of Shakespeare's works, a notion struck me that the preface prefixed by the players in 1623 to their edition of his plays had much of the manner of Ben Jonson, and an attentive comparison of that preface with various passages in Jonson's writings having abundantly supported and confirmed my conjecture, I do not hesitate now to assert that the greater part of it was written by him. Heminges and Condell being themselves wholly unused to composition, and having been furnished by Jonson, whose reputation was then at the height, with a copy of verses in praise of Shakespeare, and with others on the engraved portrait prefixed to his plays, would naturally apply to him for assistance in that part of the work in which they were, for the first time, to address the public in their own names. Steevens proceeded to produce over some 11 pages lines and passages from the address to the great variety of readers, alongside corresponding passages from Jonson's various writings, to illustrate his belief that Jonson was responsible for the lion's share of its composition, before concluding, From these numerous and marked coincidences, it is, I think, manifest that every word of the first half of this address to the reader, which is signed in the names of John Heminges and Henry Condell, was written by Ben Jonson. In 1863, the Cambridge editors of the works of William Shakespeare suggested that the epistle to the great variety of readers may have been written by some literary man in the employment of the publishers and merely signed by the two players. It will be observed that Stevens states that without doubt the greater part of the preface was written by Jonson. Yet, according to Sir George Greenwood in 1921, there can be no reasonable doubt that Jonson, demonstrably having written the greater part of the preface, wrote the whole of it as well as the epistle dedicatory. In 1908, in his introduction to his plays of Mr. William Shakespeare, Appleton Morgan, in illustrating how a considerable portion of the epistle dedicatory was adapted from Pliny's Natural History by placing several parallels from the two texts side by side with each other, commented that Heminges and Condell is a pseudonym for someone who was very much another sort of person from the two actors who ended their days as a grocer and a publican, respectively. So little known was Stevens' detailed analysis, buried away as it is in the 21-volume Boswell-Malone edition, that Professor W. Dinsmore Briggs, himself taking his lead from Maurice Castelain, who had suggested in Revue Germanique that Jonson had probably corrected, if not composed to the great variety of readers, believed he had discovered anew unmistakable parallels between the preface and various passages from Jonson's writing. He too not only believed Jonson to have written the address, but the epistle also. In 1914 he stated, "There is nothing inherently improbable in the idea. Everyone familiar with the literary conditions of the time will realise that fact. That the two are by the same writer cannot be doubted by any reader." In 1920, with customary authority, the orthodox Professor Felix Schelling pronounced the actors were simply not capable of writing the two prefaces to which their names are appended. Neither Heminges nor Condell was a writer, and such a book ought to be properly introduced. In such a juncture there could be no choice. The best book of the hour demanded sponsorship by the greatest contemporary man of letters. Ben Jonson was the king's poet, the laureate, the literary dictator of the age, and Jonson rose nobly to the task, penning not only the epigram to the reader and his noble personal eulogium, but both the prose addresses of dedication. Of this matter there can be no question whatever, and if anyone is troubled by the signatures of Heminges and Condell appended to two addresses which neither of them actually wrote, let him examine into his own conduct in the matter of circulars, resolutions, and other papers which he has had written by skilled competence for the appendage of his signature. In contrast, in Bacon cryptograms in Shakespeare, Isaac Holplatt observes of the epistle dedicatory, "Now, if manner, style, diction mean anything, this dedication was written by no other than Francis Bacon, and anyone sufficiently interested can compare the dedication as a whole with Bacon's essays." As to the second piece, to which the names of Heminges and Condell are appended, in regard to the address to the readers, the case is not so clear. It might have been written by Jonson. Its badinage somewhat resembles that of some of his introductions, but the wit is more sprightly. I believe this also to be by Bacon for one reason, that it is also top-heavy with legal phrases, not a peculiarity of Jonson's. Perhaps the dedication and the address to the great variety of readers were a joint composition by Bacon and Jonson, or perhaps Bacon made use of some of Jonson's writings when writing both of them, which are clearly written by a lawyer, replete as they are with the language of the law. One thing is sure, unbeknown to Hull Platt, there are several Baconian cryptograms and anagrams in the address to the great variety of readers, confirming its Baconian provenance. In special Baconian Shakespearean editions, the use of a large initial capital letter F indicates the presence of cryptic devices and ciphers, which were used by Bacon in his Shakespeare poem The Rape of Lucrece, the first sonnet in the edition of Shakespeare's sonnets, and the first letter in the first verse of A Lover's Complaint. The monogram FRB also appears in the first edition of the Shakespeare sonnets. The large capital F and capital R, and following the indentation, a capital B again provides the initials FRB, the same secret signature which commences The Rape of Lucrece. The Shakespeare narrative poem A Lover's Complaint was also published as part of the first edition of the Shakespeare sonnets, written in rhyme royal, the same metre as The Rape of Lucrece. The first verse of A Lover's Complaint again commences with a large capital F, and enclosed within it are two other capital letters R and A, and down below the letters which make up My Name, and from the B in the third line, reading upwards A and Con for Bacon. Thus it reads, My name is Francis Bacon. In the same manner, the address to the great variety of readers prefixed to the first folio also begins with a large capital F set within a woodcut, resulting in the indentation of the first 7 lines. The cryptic phrase in the first and second line, There you are numbered, points to the alert reader the presence of ciphers within the lettered woodblock as well as the rest of the page. The large capital F with the capital R, as with the previous examples, forms the monogram FR for Francis. The reverse reading under the F lettered woodblock yields Baco, the contracted name of its author Bacon, and reading downward from the F, the first 3 lines yields an anagram of FR Bacon. The whole page is also replete with a series of Baconian ciphers, confirming Francis Bacon is Shakespeare. Heminges and Condell did not organise and oversee the enormous enterprise and production of the first folio, and nor did they write the 2 epistles to which their names are attached. They did no more than apparently allow their names to be associated with the Shakespeare first folio, and it was Bacon and Johnson who were responsible for producing and composing the 2 epistles signed in their names. The Stratfordian allusion is predicated upon the fiction that 7 years after the death of William Shakspere of Stratford, his acting friends John Heminges and Henry Condell compiled, edited and wrote its dedication and address to which their names are signed. It is evident they did not participate in the production of the first folio, which removes the central plank of the Stratfordian fiction that William Shakspere wrote the Shakespeare works.